We'll have this session in English. And good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session today on clinical research and clinical trials, evolution and challenges, new challenges. So medical science and medical practice have been facing very big challenge in the latest years. They are becoming more and more interdisciplinary. Nowadays you integrate disciplines such as bioinformatics, mathematics, chemistry, physics, nanotechnologies, social science, behavioral sciences. These are challenges for all the community. And then we also have big data and real world data and all the digital tools that have the potential to leverage our understanding of complex chronic diseases and the interdependencies between these diseases and in an aging society. So these are challenges that are faced every day by the community of clinical research. And we would like today to explore some of these challenges and how can researchers and organizations and countries get prepared to work in a better way. We have with us 4 researchers, clinical researchers, that I appreciate very much their presence. The scheme that we have for today is that we start with a short presentation by each of them. So I will introduce you as you go and speak, and then this will be followed by a panel discussion that will also be open to the audience. So please, when it's time, do raise your hand and share your questions with us. So I would like to call the first speaker. I will leave the titles if you don't mind. So I would like to call to the stage António Jacinto. António is the Vice Dean for Research of the Nova Medical School at the Nova University of Lisbon. He's a Principal Investigator at the Chronic Diseases Research Center, CEDOC, and he's a Professor of Cell and Molecular Biology in the medical degree of the Nova Medical School. António's main research interests are tissue and organ regeneration, from fundamental research to translation and innovation. António, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Can I have my first slide? Okay, so today I will give you an overview of clinical research that we are doing in the Nova Medical School, mainly about how we are organized to do clinical research. And this is basically what we've been building up in the last 10 years. So first, let me start by giving a brief description of what we mean by clinical research. So this is research conducted in human subjects to determine the efficacy and safety of devices, new treatments, and diagnostics. So of course, the clinical research is also tightly linked to translation research. So, because to test something, for example, to test a new treatment, you have to develop it first. So these two things are normally coming together, clinical and translational research. And if you look in more detail, you can identify several steps in translation research that goes from the translation to humans. That means the translation of the basic research findings to ideas that can be used for treatments, for instance, in humans, to the different trial phases. So phase 1 trial, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, up to population level outcome studies. So when we're talking about translation and clinical research, we're really talking about all of these aspects, and we're talking about treatments, diagnostics, and new devices. So in the Nova Medical School, we have one main center of research, that's the Chronic Disease Research Center, and this center has 3 main units. These are FCT funded and evaluated units, iNova4Health, Toxomics, and CHRC. So these are the research units that we have. And these units are part of larger entities, what we call associated laboratories in Portugal. And these basically are consortiums of multiple units. And we are a part of 2 associated laboratories, the Life Science for Future, that is more on basic translation side, and REAL, that is a associated laboratory that is more focused on public health, global health, and more clinical research. But we're not in these alone. So these units and the laboratories and the associated laboratories that we are part of are integrated in the large network. So the INNOVA4Health research unit has as members not only the CEDOC, the Chronic Disease Research Center, but also the Oncology Institute in Lisbon, the IBET in Oeiras, AICIB, and there are 3 different research units, INNOVA4Health, GreenIT, Most Micro, that constitute this laboratory associado or associated laboratory. And the Instituto Gulbenkian is also involved in some of these units and also directly in the laboratory associado. So what we have here is more than 500 researchers with PhDs that do research from basic translation and clinical research. So a very complex, dense network of research and with a lot of potential to produce clinical research. So in terms of instruments that we have, institutions to support clinical research, we have 2 types. We have CTU, a clinical trial unit, and we have 2 collabs. Collabs is this new associations funded by the government to develop different types of translation to economy of research, and these 2 are in the clinical research area. So the Nova Crew is our clinical trial unit. That is a classical clinical trial unit that works as a service provider or as a partner in clinical research. The Value4Health collab is a collab that is aimed at restricting healthcare delivery towards a use of value-based healthcare and more patient empowerment. And the collab trials is a collab that is aimed at contribute to develop new types of trials and more competitive trials to get innovative products and services to the market. I'm going to tell a little bit more about the Nova Crew. That's our clinical trial unit because it's a bit more established and for questions of time. So we do all types of studies from multicentric but mainly initiated by investigators and in all phases. We work on a very large range of diseases, from infectious diseases to rheumatology to rare diseases. And at the moment, this unit is conducting 8 observable studies and 13 clinical trials. And it's relatively recent and it's been growing constantly, so it's a very strong instrument for researchers in our institution to develop the clinical trials. And so the services that are provided go from the design of the studies, monitoring, data management, up to study coordination in collaboration to the health research units. And we are also involved in training programs. So MAGIC is a master degree that is done in the Nova Medical School for clinical research management, a 2-year master degree, and we also have a post-graduation on pharmaceutical medicine. So in terms of healthcare units that we are associated with, there is a very large number because the medical school is associated with a very large number of hospitals and healthcare centers where the students do the medical training. And so we have very close relationship with these institutions. And so we have in the medical school 230 students per year. And we have very strong connections with 21 hospitals, 20 health centers. And this makes a very large footprint in the Lisbon area. So we have all this research infrastructure. We have all this access to healthcare centers. So I would say, so this is our research, our clinical research should be fantastic, but it's not. So I have to say that it's been growing and it's been improving a lot in Nova Medical School and all over Portugal, but there are really major challenges that we have to overcome in the next two years so that the clinical research gets to the level where it should be. And my last slide is just a few challenges that I have identified, and I hope that we can discuss them in the discussion time, and maybe my colleagues will also address some of them. And the first one I identify is that we have very limited funding specific for clinical research in Portugal. The second one is that the involvement of Ministry of Health in clinical research is surprisingly less, it's not very impressive. So, and this is, there's not really a major involvement in terms of research funding, in terms of importance of medical research in medical careers, and in terms of structuring the national health system to doing more and better clinical research. And then I believe we still have a problem of expertise and mindset, of a culture problem that we have to develop in the healthcare system for better and more clinical research. We need to develop more our academic centers. There are already good examples, but we still have to develop our academic centers to have a better connection between academia, research institutes, and hospitals. And finally, I think we're still a long way to get a very mature and a good system, a good ecosystem where we have all the necessary partners so we can provide the best possible care for patients. Just to finish in a positive tone, I mention two things that are very good in Portugal. So one is PTCRAN. It's the Portuguese Clinical Research Infrastructure Network that involves a lot of clinical research units, clinical trial units all over Portugal, and I think it's very important to have everybody talking, and this is part of the ECRAN, that's European Clinical Research Infrastructure Network. And the other very good thing we have is AICIB, and AICIB is something absolutely, is the funding agency for clinical research, and I think it's an absolutely essential player in our system, but of course, as we know, is still underfunded and understaffed, so I think we need to put a lot more money and organization in AICIB so we can play a key role in the development of our clinical research.
Thank you, António. We can applaud. Thank you so much. Very nice points that we will surely touch during our panel discussion. So our next speaker on my left is João Forjaz de Lacerda. He's a physician at the Hematology and Bone Marrow Transplant Service at the biggest hospital in Portugal, Hospital Santa Maria. He's also a professor of medicine and head of the international office at the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Lisbon, and he's a group leader of the Hematology and Transplant Immunology group at the Institute of Molecular Medicine, João Lobo Antunes. In addition, João Forjaz de Lacerda is the president of the Ethics Committee and the vice president of the Clinical Research Center of the Lisbon Academic Medical Center. So, João, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrícia, for this wonderful invitation. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to, I interpreted this invitation and the topic more in terms of the challenges and the panel discussion that I thought we should have on this very, very important topic. So I will also share some elements of the ecosystem that I live in, which is the University of Lisbon, the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Lisbon, Hospital Santa Maria, and IMM, and just a few elements of success. I'm starting with IMN. So these are the usual metrics that most people look at when we evaluating science in general. And so, as you can see, this gives you an idea of the overall power of IMM in terms of publications, citations in the literature, also in capturing funds. You have, throughout the years, 12, 13 years of the history of capturing funds both nationally and internationally at IMM. But what I really would like to stress here is the effort that we all have to go through in order to get these funds. So here you have the number of submissions, both nationally and internationally, that all labs have to undergo in order to be successful. So we're roughly somewhere between 10 and 15% success rate, which is quite satisfactory, but still there's a big effort involved by the community at IMM, and it has to be that way. We also now mostly within the hospital, but in fact this is managed by the academic center, which is composed by the three institutions: the hospital, the faculty, and IMM. We set up the Clinical Research Center. Over these last 10 years, several people did that, and this has been a significant endeavor that has been evolving recently in a rather positive way, and everyone really felt within the institution that this was critical in order to develop clinical research, in order to capture clinical trials, to increase the visibility of the hospital, of the institution, to bring funds from this perspective to mostly to the hospital, of course, but funds that would help to maintain a structure that is able not only to give answers to, let's say, clinical trials that are promoted by the pharmaceutical companies, but also, and even more so, I would say, academic-driven clinical trials that are proposed within the institution where there are very limited funds, as we all know. And so there are, specific facilities that we have on the 8th floor of the hospital. This gives you an idea of the number of studies that we have currently under evaluation and the different specialties where this is happening, and the number of patients that we now have under clinical trials in the hospital. And so this is increasing on a yearly basis, and it's something that is really fundamental to increase clinical research, patient-driven research in the hospital, and to be able to really deliver a professional service for doctors within the hospital. Of course, the clinical center has several very important responsibilities, facilitating the whole procedure of submission of the study, approval of the study, bringing the study to the administration board of the hospital, directing the study towards the ethics committee, and really accelerating all of these processes that, as we well know, can sometimes take months, but one of the main objectives is really to make all of this process significantly faster. At the same time, there is the goal, and we have already several people that have been hired by the funds generated by the clinical center. The hospital has also, the administration of the hospital has also been interested in developing this area, I have to admit, and even now, for instance, hiring the coordinator of the center as someone that's actually is currently being paid by the hospital. And so all those small steps represent really so much and really so much potential for the future. Essentially that. The center has now clinical trial monitors, data managers, and we'll keep track of the several indicators of success. For instance, how long does it take for a study that is initially proposed to the hospital to being approved? How long does it take from approval to the recruitment of the first patient, and so forth? Are the accrual of the patient's goals met within each individual clinical trial? So this is the good part, I would say. But what I would like to focus is really, because I thought that was the primary aim of this talk and of our gathering here, is really the difficulties. And there are many. And so I would argue that hospitals in general, in order to perform clinical research, need to set up the indispensable infrastructures, spaces, people, human resources, coordinators, data managers, clinical trial monitors. There is no way that any hospital will be able to answer adequately to the requisites and to the callings from the industry, and without all this entourage, which is absolutely essential. Then, of course, facilities. Facilities need to be in place. We have three in the Clinical Research Center, for instance. There are 3 halls for outpatient consults. We have, of course, meeting rooms, etc. So that is also very, very critical, that people know where to go to and knowing that there will be a staff waiting for them. Then, as I mentioned, all the stuff that is absolutely critical for this setting. I would like to change gears to a very important topic, which I think is the element of the physician scientist. And this is, I think, a relatively rare breed all over the world. And I think that one of the questions that really arises and we should discuss it a little bit more, is why should a doctor, a physician, these days in Portugal, why should this person pursue a scientist career as well? And how is that promoted? What benefits does it bring to him or to her? And so I think that these are really critical questions. And especially when we are considering when we all know that we have in the public system underpaid doctors, and when the system has not been developed over the last few decades towards nurturing this development. The metrics of hospital practice nowadays, of course, they include scientific outputs, presentations in national and international meetings, peer review publications, all of that, capacity to capture funds, all of that has been included. But it's relatively mild. Even if we look at career development over time in the Ministry of Health, that is just an item, a relatively small item to be considered. So the question that I would like to raise is, why should a physician, a young physician, devote a significant amount of time doing this? When, for instance, as I'm just showing, protected time for research is usually not available. What traditionally our peers expect from physicians who do research is that they do the research in their own time. And that, of course, for a clinical, for a physician who's also a specialist in a certain area, of course, that is critical. That person has to be someone who's very proficient in his or her area of expertise, in his specialty, etc. So that is, of course, critical. But allowing for some protected time is also important. This should be a metric of a milestone and an output of that physician's practice. And so it should be an indicator of success as well. Not only the number, the number of patients that you see every month or every year, how many surgeries can you perform, etc. All of those indicators are essential, but these are also very, very important, I would like to suggest. And so what this, I think, will raise, if we want to think about this in a mature way, is how are we, as a community, going to, or proposing that we actually rethink medical careers in what we now call academic medical centers? Should there be a career more geared towards nurturing physician scientists? And can we somehow encourage these people to pursue this path? I think this is a major challenge. And what tools do the associated ministries, health, technology, science, education, how do they propose to come together, because they have to come together, and think for a global solution for this issue? And so in the end, we have to recognize and promote excellence in these physician scientists' activities. And that has to be, of course, clinical practice. How can this person, for instance, bring translation into clinical practice? And then there will be, of course, the usual metrics of scientific success that have always to be present. And so the first topic I would like to touch upon, and this does not bear specifically to clinical research, it bears to research in general in Portugal, is how to foster stable research careers. Because this is one problem that I have, and that all people that run wet labs have, is to, we all have some professional scientists in the lab, in the sense that we have, postdocs, people that did their degrees in basic sciences and then pursued more clinical related research. And so how can we foster stable research careers within the system that we currently have? And we know that most postdocs will never become group leaders. So the question is, now with less than 10% of the postdocs being able to secure relatively medium to long-term scientific employment, these people are bound to leave. And I can tell you several stories in the discussion panel afterwards. I don't want to take too long. And so the question that I would like to raise about this topic is, have we set the bar too high? Are we able to bring the bar slightly lower, maintaining still excellence, but so that we can offer a perspective of a career for the excellent researcher that does not meet the very high standard, the top standard? And please, I would like to submit that it is more difficult for these researchers associated with clinical research to meet and to compete just with the traditional metrics, because people that have to deal with patient samples, patient research takes so long. The level of impact of the publications is frequently not as high as the very top notch of the basic science. So if you look at the CVs and the scientific outputs of some of these people, in fact, they will not be able to match the ones more associated with some of the top basic science groups. And so that becomes a problem. And we all have very important people in our labs that were simply had to leave because they see no future for science after, let's say, 10 years of being a postdoc. And so I would like to leave it at that. And thank you again very much for the invitation. And so I think we'll discuss in the end.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we will surely take... Thank you. We'll surely take some of these, the topics that were raised here, especially trying to look and for suggestions, for constructive ideas that we can implement. Some of them are national pains, others are not, are from Europe, and they are part of the job in this field. But we will surely go deeper into them. So now we have online Nuno Sousa. Nuno, thank you so much for joining us today. You can hear me, right? You do. So Nuno will be Nuno Sousa is our next speaker. He's a full professor at the School of Medicine of the University of Minho. He is currently the president of the School of Medicine, and he's a neuroradiologist by training, performing research in neuroscience. The work from Nuno Sousa Lab goes from basic to clinical research, and Nuno is also the director of the Clinical Academic Center at Hospital de Braga. Nuno, it's a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry for not being in Lisbon in the meeting. Let me start by thanking Paula, Alves, and Patrícia Calado for the invitation, which I'm always happy to accept, because I think that this is such an important topic that it's always great to have opportunities to discuss among colleagues how to actually foresee a better future for clinical research. So much of what I would say has already been said, so I really will not waste time repeating what both António, Jacinto and João Lacerda have said. Let me raise the question of why should we invest in clinical research? Why should we actually create a specific research agenda for clinical research? And this will be the main driver of my very short talk. I would start by saying that for many years I was puzzled by the disalignment between the quality of healthcare in Portugal, measured by many different indicators, the quality of the academic ecosystem, the quality of the fundamental translational research in Portugal, and especially by the raise that occurred in the last 3 decades, in which made Portugal move up in the scale from around the 40th position to the 20th position, and the absolute flat evolution we had in clinical research. This disalignment is really what I would like to discuss first with you today in this talk. So let me see if I can change the slides. I'm not being able to do that, so I will ask. Can you move to the next slide, please?
I can do that for you. Okay. It's done.
Thank you, Patrícia. So, and the first one is how can we build trust? And trust is something that you always need to pay attention to. It's something that takes time to be developed, and it goes away in a fraction of a second. So what do I mean by building trust? I think that there are several stakeholders involved in clinical research, and this is one of the main issues that we have to take into account in this very specific area. One of the stakeholders are the regulatory agencies, regulatory authorities, who have a critical role. And the role is not only to scrutinize, but also actually to promote clinical research. And I think that for agencies that actually supervise clinical research, this dual role of scrutiny, fiduciary role, but also the generative role of promoting clinical research must be incorporated in their attitude. The second very important stakeholder is funding agencies. As in every other sector, we need to find ways to actually promote clinical research, mainly that is driven by the researchers. And so we need to have an agenda from funding agencies to actually build the capacity, but also to build the roadmap for us to move from the A to B. The third important stakeholder in my mind are promoters and CROs. And it is vital for us to really align our efforts with promoters and CROs. The largest promoters actually have central offices that manage globally their clinical research efforts. And so for countries like Portugal, more peripherally located, it's absolutely vital that we build trust and create the ecosystem that allows them to really be able to attract those trials to Portugal. I'm illustrating here some of the data from our clinical center, in which I believe these are the critical KPIs for us as the other important stakeholder to build trust. The first is to actually show our ability to run ongoing trials, to be extremely efficient in replying to feasibility questionnaires, and to create this pipeline of trials that are being matured before being submitted. As you can see, I'm showing you the data from the industry-driven trials in our center. As you can see, this is growing. There's a slight growth. The numbers are quite impressive. And these numbers are only possible because we have created the infrastructure. Let me tell you that in the hospital, we serve a population of 1.2 million people. And when we started this clinical academic center, we had very few clinical trials. You know, the fingers in my hand would be enough to count them. Currently, we have more than 150 studies going on. The other key performance indicator that I think it's critical for the promoters and CROs is our ability to recruit and to build trust on those numbers. So you see in the graph on the right side, on blue, our rate of recruitment for trials that have already closed the recruitment, and it's above 100%. And in red, you see the evolution we had throughout the years in this particular indicator for open recruitment trials. But these days, it's very close to also to 100%. And this is once again critical because for the CRO and for the promoter, it is vital for them when they open a center that we fulfill what we had agreed in terms of recruitment rates. The other one that I would like to highlight as a very important KPI, and we have witnessed that in our center, is time to recruitment of first patient. And we do make an effort to keep it below 2 weeks. And this is vital if you really want to engage the promoters into any clinical research center. So I think I've highlighted to you the concept of building trust as a critical issue to really make clinical research move forward. If you can move for the next slide, I will address now the issue of infrastructure. So thank you. And by infrastructure, I will not repeat what has been said already. This is probably the main reason why we have this disalignment between the performance in basic and translational research versus clinical research in Portugal. We really need people, a dedicated team, a multidisciplinary team, as has been already highlighted. We need a particular setup that will align our healthcare activities with our research activities. And without this, it will be impossible for us to move forward. Another very important thing to move forward, and I will ask Patrícia to move to the next slide, is to increase the complexity of the clinical studies we perform. And this is really critical. The setting up for us of a phase 1 unit has been really pivotal because these are typically more complex clinical studies involving sometimes first in humans, but this actually closed the pipeline with our preclinical efforts and the other phases of clinical trials. And it is very common when we attract earlier phase studies to be able to then also be selected for future phases in clinical studies. So this infrastructure should also promote complexity, and by doing that, we will once again build trust with external stakeholders. The next slide, please. This is to illustrate that clinical research is actually under continuous pressure for adaptation. And adaptation is vital. But Patrícia Calado, in the introduction of this session, already highlighted that the last 2 years have been, the pinnacle of the need for adaptation. There's an international movement also to incorporate technology to decentralize clinical research. And this is vital, and this is the way we are doing it. So we have set up tools to do home nursing visits, to do telemedicine visits, and by doing that, we were able, even during the pandemics, to once again build trust with promoters, with CROs, because we were able to keep the operation of our clinical research going without major impact. The introduction of the relevance of using technology, namely digital medicine, is absolutely vital in my mind. And I will use also a clinician lens to highlight the levers for digital technology in clinical development. One being the engagement of the patients. It will really promote patient-centric clinical development. It promotes collaboration with patients. It will promote easiness for access and equality for access. And this is absolutely vital for engagement. In the domain of innovation, it actually improves adherence to therapy. And this is critical because it increases the statistical power, the sensitivity of the clinical studies, and it captures patient-centered endpoints, which are absolutely vital for value propositions. It also gives new insights in terms of data. And this is, once again, absolutely vital for what we do. And last but not least, it promotes gains, efficiencies, and optimize times and costs. So we will expedite patient enrollment, we will improve retention, and we will increase the diversity of the population being studied. We will also improve the productivity of the investigation. And so by sharing these with you, I think I've highlighted to you the importance of incorporating digital technologies in our pipeline and in our processes within clinical research. The next slide, please, will tell you about the impacts and the gains. And this is the answer to the leading question of my talk. It is obvious that those centers that are really engaged into clinical research activities also increase the quality, the excellency of the healthcare they provide to populations. As you see by the numbers of patients that we currently enroll in 2021 in 2CA, we have opened, we have given access to hundreds of patients to innovative therapies that probably would not be available for them if this ecosystem was not really created and it was not really incorporated in the practice of all the people that work in our center. So I think that this is the main message. We should really have an agenda for clinical research, and we have to be sure that our authorities really understand that this is vital for us to move forward, also in terms of the population health, but also in terms of our culture and our economy. So I believe that this is why we are sitting here together discussing the value of clinical research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nuno. Always nice to hear you. And last but not least, with a special thanks to Lionel Pazart, who traveled from France to be with us today. Lionel Pazart is the coordinator of the Clinical Investigation Center in Technological Innovation. So it goes very well after Nuno's focus on technology. From the hospital, Centre Hospitalaire de Besançon. So he's a lecturer in public health and clinical research at the University of Bourgogne-Franche-Comté, a researcher at the Laboratory for Integrative Research in Clinical Neurosciences, and he's the former coordinator of the National Tech for Health Network, a component of FCRAN, so the equivalent to PTCRAN that António mentioned, dedicated to the clinical investigation of medical devices. Thank you again. The floor is yours.
I would like to complete the previous talk because I'm come from also a clinical investigation center. and mainly dedicated for translational research.
I'm sorry, Lionel, would you mind taking off your mask so that people that are online can understand and hear better? Thank
Sorry.
You.
It's just the current manner to have the mask always. And so I come from the Clinical Investigation Center of INSERM, dedicated for innovative technology. And as Antonio said, is mainly concerned by the translational research. But the particularity at the University Hospital of Besançon, in the east of France, close to Switzerland, is to see the both way. So from the bench to the bed, and so from the basic research findings, and we try to develop and transform in a practical way for the current care. But also we try to collect all the needs from the healthcare professional, but also from the patient and their relatives, in order to see if we have some opportunities to develop new medical devices, either by development, and so we try to have some relation with some companies in order to perform this development, or from basic research, and mainly in some specific fields like microtechniques from our area, but elsewhere in France on the specific subject. And so with this session, I would like to insist about the opportunities, because we speak about the evolution and new challenges, and we have some opportunities offered by the new medical device regulation, which has entered in force just 1 month ago. On next slide. Oops, I can do that. And just for the beginning, I would like to tell you the story of Otto Overbeck. Otto Overbeck was a chemist, and he worked for a pub, in fact, to develop a new beer. But in 1925, he has a new electric theory of life. He considered that the cells communicate by electricity. And on this basis, of course, he have the idea of a new technology. And he designed a portable electrotherapy machine. And of course, the use of this machine is for the desire to regenerate. And for this, you are here an advertisement about this machine. And of course, this machine is to try to have an effect on the skin, for instance, on the face, like in this case. But Overbeck have also a lot of skill for the marketing. And for the first time, he think about a form on the bottom of the page of the advertisement in order to collect some order for selling. And also, he tried to have some key opinion leaders with their advice, and he tried to get a pattern everywhere in the world just to reinforce the guarantee of the seriousness of the technology. But 2 years after the launch of the product on the market, we have some complaints from the doctors and from the patient, and the British Medical Association bought a box and performed some tests, and mainly tests for safety, of course, but the test with engineers and the test with doctors. And their report showed that, in fact, the current is too small to have any effect, and so no harmful effect, of course. In this case, you can see that a new technology with a medical purpose, but we can have some study after the market of the product. In fact, is 1 century ago, but a few years ago, we had the robot-assisted surgery, for instance, Da Vinci robot. We have very few clinical trials before the launch of the robot on the market. And in the same case, the indication of the Da Vinci, for instance, is defined afterwards, after the launch on the market. And this is a problem for that, because, of course, for the medical device, we need to have some confidence about the safety and the performance on the device. On the new medical device regulation, just coming forth 1 month ago, insist about the necessity to have some clinical evaluation for any type of medical device. And mainly for high-risk medical device, clinical investigation, it means clinical trials, is mandatory to prove the safety and the performance of a system, a new system, in order to get the CE mark and so to be arrive on the market. But if we can see the figures, and this is the figure of last year, extract from the clinicaltrials.gov registry, and you can see on the map, on the figures, that we have around almost 6,500 clinical study protocol registered in 1 year during this period of time everywhere in the world, and 27% perform in Europe, in Portugal 22. And in the same year, you have on the market between 15 to 30,000 new medical devices. In the same time, you have less than 1,000 drugs. But in the number of clinical study protocol, you have 3 times more study dedicated for the drugs than for on medical device. And of course, we have a lot of constraint with the medical device, and it's not the same like for drugs. The randomization can be difficult. The binding is most often impossible, where the hip prosthesis or heart prosthesis and so on is not possible, of course. And the impact of operator on the environment, the organization, is very important, not only with the device, but with, of course, the end user of the device. And of course, when we see the situation and the evolution of the number of clinical trials dedicated for medical device, we can see that we have a big gap between the number of clinical device launched on the market every year, the willing of the regulation, and the reality. And of course, it's an opportunity to develop more and more clinical study, but we have no skill for that. And as we can say just before, the design of the clinical trials in this way could be adapted to the situation and to the challenge offered by medical device. And even MedTech Europe, for instance, or Medicine, a large group of companies, say that there is a huge need of competency in regulation on clinical study at this moment. The last thing, last argument is, in fact, a recent publication analyzed the study performed for medical device, and we can see that almost 2/3 of the study are, in fact, a low level of evidence. And in this case, we would like to develop inside the consortium a new program. And the first is a program of training, and we perform this program now since 4 years. And the new one is under review by the EIT Health. EIT is the European Institute of Transfer of Technology for Health, and it delivers some call of thunder dedicated for the innovation in health. And this one is performed with the University of Lisbon and with INSERM and with other partners in a different country, like in Poland, in Romania, in Greece, in Spain, Germany, and so on. And of course, in this way, we would like to develop first an e-learning module in order to have a widespread communication about the new thing concerning the clinical study on medical device and the regulation, and also a winter camp during a 10 days period by a new pedagogical approach with the learning by doing. And in this case, we organize a first phase of immersion in hospital with engineer, with market designer, with other people concerned by the development of the new medical device in order to see exactly the needs and to see the practical aspect to develop new project. And in this case, you have here on the slide the different part of the program, but mainly concerned by clinical evaluation, but also with the preclinical evaluation, because you need to develop some prerequisite in order to get the authorization for the first in-human study, for instance. And also a lot of things about the data collection, the data protection, and the data accessibility, because it's a big challenge now. And just previously, they speak about all the data available in the hospital, but we have to use it in the real world basis, of course, but to define the project in the future. And just to close my talk, remember, at the period of time 1 century before, we have the Overbeck's rejuvenator, and in this case, today we have the same, and you can find the same, but of course the advertisement is quite different, the public is different, but I'm sure that the effect is the same, and we like also some study about the performance, because it's mainly on the safety, and we encourage everybody to perform new ID and new clinical study on this ID. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lionel. So we do have roughly 25 minutes for discussion. I would propose that from my side at least, I would go for 2 questions that I would, or major topics that then you can decide how to funnel. Maybe we start with the opportunities, with the opportunities that we have and how can we tackle them. So I will follow on Lionel's presentation. He gave us a great overview of the new regulation on medical devices that entered into force on May 26th. So the regulation encourages or even obliges manufacturers to carry out more research, not only for the CE marking, but also for the post-marketing research. And this might be an opportunity for the European researchers to take advantage of and to get engaged in opportunities of collaborative research too. And following on this, and I have a clear conflict of interest because I'm a national contact point and delegate for health in the European Research Program. So I would also like to discuss a bit what is the impact of the European research programs in clinical research, so at the EU level, because they allow integration within international research networks, access to infrastructures, to methods, to results, and ultimately to funding. So I would like to hear Lionel on this, and also João, because it was not mentioned, but João Forjaz Lacerda, he's the coordinator of an H2020 clinical trial project, 3 Generation, a big project involving 6 countries, I would believe, 6 European countries plus the USA. And from Lionel's slide, I counted 4 partners in this project that you told us about. So a first view from your side on what are the opportunities that are brought by these European research programs.
Yes, of course, it's an opportunity to have some European project. And as Antonio said, with the PT CRIN in CRIN, we share the same methodology, the same spirit to conduct the study, and now we can go on without any discussion. The discussion is mainly to how to do everything in each country. But of course, to design the protocol, to design the manner, to perform the study, and so on, is not a problem. And so it's a real opportunity because the fund of the Europe, and Horizon Europe, the new name for the FP9, in fact, offered the opportunity of a big budget for that. And also we have seen during the COVID crisis also the possibility to set up very quickly a larger study than previously, even where the constraint of regulation and so on, they are shorter. So it's possible to go on quicker now in some project at a European level than in the past. And with such an organization and with the collaboration already done in some place, of course, we have the capacity to go ahead very quickly in this way.
So in our case, we applied some time ago in the beginning of the Horizon 2020, in fact, wasn't it? In the beginning of the Horizon 2020, we were lucky enough, and at the time bold enough, I think, to go for a full proposal up front, which is usually slightly less competitive. And we were funded in a regenerative medicine call. And so the area that...
clinical research.
Clinical research, yes. And in clinical research, and because I do bone marrow transplants, hematopoietic stem cell transplants, we have a complication post-transplant called chronic graft-versus-host disease, where there is aggression, so just to give you a highlight, an overview, where there is an aggression of normal tissues of the patient by the immune system of the donor. And so there was this complication post-transplant looks very much like an autoimmune disease. And so there is a great room for improvement, and from that perspective, regeneration. This is why we went for a regenerative medicine call. And so in fact, what it is it's a series of phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials of cell therapy, of donor regulatory T cells. So we go back to the donor, we purify regulatory T cells, we infuse them into the patients, and we perform the phase 1 clinical trial, which of course the objective was safety, and we increased doses across several centers in Europe, and now we are just completing the phase 2 clinical trials. So what can I say? It's a relatively small consortium of clinical partners and clinical trials enrolling patients in Portugal, so here in Lisbon, and we've also included many patients from the north of the country with a partnership that I have with IPO Porto, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank them. So here in Portugal, in Seville, in Liège, in Belgium, in Regensburg, Germany, and in Bologna, Italy. And then we have several tasks looking at tracking these cells by next generation sequencing of the TCR, etc. And that's done by another partner in Germany. And so it's been overall a wonderful experience. We are just wrapping up the results. We have not presented them. We have agreed more or less on a common dates for dissemination. And it's been a wonderful experience. I highly recommend it. Very rocky along the way, and I'll be able to tell you some of these stories. You know some of them whenever you wish. Very entertaining, some of them, but overall a wonderful experience and very important for the development of, now in terms of our perspective, for the development of our group, it's been very important. In terms of the partnerships, that, of course, we all developed within the consortium and outside of the consortium has also been very enriching.
Yeah, thank you so much. Of course, I do agree. I think the impact is huge. So it's not only not only the money, but the opportunity to work at European level with a greater impact, and also to leverage the work of the own group.
But
so now,
no, just a comment. The needs is the same in every country, and so if we share the needs, we can share the solution too, and the effort in clinical research to get the solution.
Of course. I would add that these are usually needs that cannot be fulfilled by one group or one institution or even one country. That's why we have to give it an answer at European or global level. Thank you so much. So now going a bit down to the national level and taking up some of the points that you mentioned, maybe I would suggest starting by discussing something that was touched here by several of you. I would make the question like this, and always in a constructive way, because from my personal perspective, I think we can have, in generally in life, different configurations for a problem or whatever, as long as they work. It doesn't mean that there is only one solution. So keeping this freedom of alternatives, and starting maybe with António and then going to Nuno, how do you see the role of the different ministries in clinical research? They might then converge into an agency or not, but because, as you mentioned, responsibilities are spread between different public authorities and policymakers. So what should be the responsibility, the role, either delegated or not, of the ministries? I would say at least health, research, and economy. António, would you like to start?
I believe that the Ministry of Health should have a key role on defining at least some of the aspects of clinical research, identify areas, support the national system with infrastructure, regulate medical careers. And of course, it should also contribute with, with resources for that. But I think it's part of the mission to shape the health of the country, right? And if clinical research is so important, I think they should embrace this mission of improving clinical research and provide the resources. Of course, this should have done in collaboration with the Ministry of Science, but I believe there are already plenty of solutions out there in other countries, and there are probably different models where there is more shared responsibility, or there is more responsibility on the Ministry of Health, but for sure it has to be involved.
Nuno Sousa, would you please comment? We cannot hear you.
Really? But I have my
It's okay
micro.
now. It's okay now.
Okay. So as I've tried to highlight in the presentation, I think it's I think it's clear, well, at least to me, it's absolutely clear that institutions that enroll in clinical research actually increase the quality of the healthcare they provide. And so if that is the case, and there's several levels of evidence to support this claim. So if this is the case, Patrícia, I think it's a no-brainer that this should be a really high priority for the Ministry of Health. The second thing, the second dimension is the capacitation, the education, the research. And so it is also obvious for me that it is vital for the Ministry of Science to and higher education in the Portuguese case, to be involved and to be actually also creating new opportunities, new avenues for the generation of knowledge. Because in clinical research, the journey to generate value, to reach the patient, to reach the population is quite obvious. Innovation is part of the ecosystem. So there's great economic value in what we do in clinical research at many different levels. And so it is also obvious for me that the Ministry of Economy should be involved in this in this effort, in this national effort. So these are the obvious ones. Obviously, we could add others, but I think that the current situation in Portugal is that this topic is probably only perceived and given the priority, the highest priority from the lens of science. And as António was saying, it is vital that we open the the spectrum of influence to other areas, so that Portugal, and this holds true for other countries, even though in different dimensions, really can move forward. And in this case, we just have to follow the excellent examples that we have witnessed and close to us, for instance, in Spain, or a bit more distance in Belgium, Netherlands, which are, especially the last two, which are countries that will be of similar size than Portugal, and really have an operation in clinical research that is much more impactful, with much greater gains. The example of Spain is also wonderful, because it's very close to us, and we share a very similar culture, and the rate at which they are improving in this area is absolutely impressive. And I think it's a great example for us to see what is going on, and to adapt to our context, but actually to follow some of the initiatives and actions that have been done in these places.
Yeah, so not
And
reinventing the wheel.
so, Patricia, sorry, last but not least, we also have to do an effort in Portugal to minimize our tendency to work in silos. It's absolutely critical for us to have critical mass to move forward. The main reason why in our center we do not convert contacts in trials that are submitted to the center is because Portugal is not selected. So this really calls for a common action for us to really engage into networks that would allow us to be much more attractive for promoters and CROs.
Definitely, thank you. I'm sure you would like to comment too.
Thank you. Well, just really to re-emphasize what's been said. And I was just thinking about that term that Nuno just used, silos, because that's exactly what I was feeling. I feel that we need to permeate these, to converge, really, to converge this willingness to really solve this issue, this problem. And so it is very important that, health, research, technology come together with, I would say, a master plan that has to be formulated beyond the political spectrum, and that has to really, because it will take a long time to develop. It has to be very strong, very structured. To be able to permeate and to evolve along governments over time, over decades, I would say, both top down and bottom up. And there will be so many benefits from this. And some of them have already been alluded to. For instance, when an institution can answer positively to clinical trial requisites from pharmaceutical companies, if that institution is perceived both nationally and internationally as effective in recruiting patients, that will attract more studies. That innovation will offer potentially interesting new drugs to patients where innovation is most needed, such as, for instance, cancer, immunologic diseases, and many others, in fact, and with devices in many other specialties of medicine. And so this part will bring new drugs, will actually allow centers and clinical centers to save a lot of money in treating these patients, because these drugs will be provided, and with extra funds for the institution. But at the same time, there has to be a culture of research. And this is where the academic medical center comes. It takes a lot more than call a university hospital or a hospital, an academic medical center. You don't even need to use the term. What you need to have is functional academic medical centers that breed a scientific atmosphere, and that permeates their day-to-day functional existence. And so this is, it takes a long time. It will take a long time.
Can I ask, and then I would like to hear you also on your experience, but can I ask, following this comment from João Lacerda, but do you feel we are moving in the right way? Because we have new things in Portugal with clinical academic centers. We have that where you try to put together research, teaching, and healthcare. We have the collaborative laboratories now, where you put together academia, science, and industry. You have hospitals involved in collabs, like António showed. We have a collab now from the Hospital of São João in Porto, leading a collab. Do we have the right ingredients, and we should work on the recipe and on a good cook? But do we have, or are we missing pieces that we need? Is it a question of strategy, or are we missing fundamental pieces?
I think that we are evolving positively, and I think that very important steps have been taken, and new interesting develops have been are evolving, but more needs to be done.
Yeah, just a comment. The question is the attractiveness, in fact, after that, of the center. And as you said, of course, if you have already performed some study, if you can prove that you can recruit the patient very quickly and so on, it's a very good argument in order to attract a new study. But the question I have here is both. The first one is, in Portugal, do you have a process of assessment, of evaluation of the different research structure? On the second one, because you speak about the quality process and so on, do you have some intention to be certified, like ISO 9000 or some other type of certification for the clinical research? Because, for instance, in France, for the pharmaceutical company, for the company on medical device, it's compulsory, to work with a center to certify for the quality.
Yes. Nuno, Sousa, would you like to comment?
Sure. So yes, Lionel. So we do have in Portugal a research evaluation for research units. We do not yet have it established for clinical academic centers, which are the main drivers of clinical research. Having said that, this is under public discussion at the moment, and hopefully it will be established in the very near future. And obviously, this will be a very important step for us to move forward. The other thing is that, yes, for instance, in our center we have the certification, the joint certification with the hospital. But that is probably not enough. As you mentioned, it would be vital for us to have external certifications, such as the FDA certifications. If we are moving into the medical devices arena, and this is vital, it would be great also to have the ISO, both the 9000 and the 13384. 385, and these are really critical. It would be also fundamental in Portugal to have a notified body, which we don't have. We used to have when Infarmed was able to do that, but obviously it cannot be the regulatory agency and do that simultaneously, and so. And then the new rules, the European rules, we don't have currently any notified body in Portugal. And this obviously impacts on our ability to attract. Having said this, to me, the real thing is, as I said, is trust. And I've highlighted the KPIs that all the big promoters look for when they approach us. You know, they immediately ask time for approval, how many trials do you have currently, the ability to run them in parallel, then recruitment rates, time for recruitment of first patient. Now they are asking for time to closure of the trials. So these are the usual indicators. But this is, if we look at this only from the perspective of industry-driven research. It is also very important for us to promote research-driven research. And for that, we also need to do a lot of other, we need to pay attention to other indicators that are really critical. Some of them are the same all over the world. But we also need to as João Lacerda said before, we also need to reward those who are actually doing that. Otherwise, people will not be, motivated to perform that. And the pressure on the healthcare assistance side is so huge that this drives all the energy of the clinicians and the associated researchers to that particular area. So I think that we really need to have a strategic plan, a national strategic plan to really move forward. And we must move away from the idea that in every hospital in Portugal we should have a transplant center for bone marrow. It's ridiculous. So what can I say? It's the balkanization of our efforts that drives energy away and kills efficiency.
Thank you so much, Nuno. We have time for very few questions, but if you have a burning question, please raise your hand and we will be very happy to take it. Meanwhile, António, I would ask for just a final note.
Well, regarding this last issue, I think really, I believe that we have the right ingredients. And what we need now is more political commitment, like a top-down approach to really consider this clinical research a priority, and, for example, regulate the clinical academical centers, give them the right resources. So I think that's one thing we need. Other thing we probably need is, that would help, is good examples. For instance, our clinical academical center is at the moment quite behind the others. So if, for example, if the center of Nuno becomes a huge success, that will drive the others in the same direction. So I think there is also a bottom-up solution, that is, we all try to do our best and we generate success.
Thank you so much. I see yes, Susanna.
Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation. So I work for a small pharmaceutical company, and we will have maybe some product in clinical trials in hopefully following 2-3 years. My question to you is, how do academical research centers compare with other CROs in the market? Are they, for example, available for cooperations in European funded projects, for example, or are just service providers as the other CROs?
I would ask one of you, please, to answer briefly, because we are running out of time. So,
if you want,
yes,
Patrícia.
the answer is yes.
So, Susanna, I would say, how do clinical research centers in hospitals like this one's here compare to a CRO if you are interested as a small pharma company in performing a study with them or engaging in an European project?
Apply together as in cooperation in international funding, or just partnering in the clinical research
Okay,
instead
availability for cooperation and partnering. I mean,
So,
it's a
Patricia,
good
if you want-
question. If I want to partner, can I go to your websites? And do I
Well,
know
I think
who to
you need
contact?
yeah. So you need to approach some of the clinical centers that have facilities and really evaluate whether or not what you're looking for and the phase of your study is adequate for that institution. I would probably suggest that in general, of course, there is not a big tradition in Portugal for early phase clinical studies, as we know, and so I would assume that, and so the pharmaceutical companies usually don't bring first clinical trials of innovational drugs to Portugal. They usually come afterwards. In selected centers, perhaps, Min, you can also say a few words about this. That is starting to happen, but it's still relatively rare. So most of the clinical trials that come, when they come to Portugal, they come at best during the phase 2 studies. And even so, I would suggest that the largest majority after that, phase 3, most likely. So I think that this is really the stems from the lack of this national strategic plan towards the development of these centers that could have occurred over the last decades, and this is somehow the reason for that, and this is why it is so important these days in meetings such as this to really gather people around stakeholders, several stakeholders, both from the university, from the industry, from the political field, to really start thinking about ways and plans to move forward in a structured way, so that 10 years from now, the outlook will be much better.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have no time for more, unfortunately. I think that the big messages were passed. We will remember about the roadmap or the strategic agenda, whatever you want to call it. I think it's the same. I also hope that one of the good ingredients that we can have at national level, it's our new agency for clinical research and biomedical innovation. We are very committed to taking the field forward. Thank you again so much for being here with us today. We will surely meet soon in the future. Thank you, all of you that are here presently and also listening online. Thank you so much. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.